Welcome to episode 413 of the Barcelona Podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and he's Emile Evanesian, and today we may be talking World Cup, but it is also the 123rd birthday of Football Club de Barcelona.
Well, happy birthday, Barca. And yeah, that was, I've seen a lot of that on Twitter and stuff like that. It's really kind of been interesting to watch just looking back throughout history, because there's just so much of it, and it's hard to have a beat on everything that's happened with this club.
Yeah, I do notice, though, that most of Barcelona's history that I keep seeing in all of these photos, maybe it starts with Cruyff, which in theory it kind of does. When Cruyff takes over as manager, it wasn't even easy going at the beginning, but he figures it all out. And then Barcelona starts to have European success, and that's where people find that the real history of the club begins. But certainly it goes much, much, much farther back than that. But we unfortunately don't have time to go over the origin story of FC Barcelona. Maybe I'll have something on a YouTube channel or something like that in the next month or so. But we do have to talk about the World Cup, because Barcelona, that being FC Barcelona, have more players at the World Cup than any other club, believe it or not. For all of the Gerard Piqué has retired from the national team and now retired from full football, or the fact that Catalan players playing for Spain, it's a whole thing. Yet, again, Barcelona still have more players than anybody else at the World Cup. And at the moment, too, we are 2+, I'll have to say, because for those who are viewing now or listening now, the group with England and the U.S. and Iran, that might already be decided too by the time you're hearing this or listening to this, likely when I got it edited. So at the moment, though, while we're recording this, we're talking Netherlands, Qatar, and Ecuador, Senegal in Group A. Those matches are currently going on, with Netherlands up at the moment. So again, things are always changing, and there's no way I could possibly record a show without overlapping with some kind of game or some kind of football between the recording and editing process. And speaking of that too, I just want to thank everybody for their patience, because I know, I think 8 days is the longest it has been since I got a show out in, I want to say 2.5 years, something like that. It was either right before the pandemic or as the pandemic is having 8 days, quite a bit of time. So I hope you missed me. But yeah, Emile and I are back for this one. So let us begin with that World Cup update with Spain and their 7. Well, we're going to go through basically all the players for FC Barcelona plus Messi at the World Cup. And we're going to go through the score lines and try to basically give a thought or two on each game or each score line or something that stood out in whatever it is. So we do begin with that 7-0 over Costa Rica. Alba, Pedri, Busquets, Gavi, Ferran Torres all started. Gavi became the youngest ever player to play in a World Cup match at 18 years and 110 days. Fun fact, too, Spain became the first European side to name 2 teenagers, that being Gavi and Pedri, of course, in their starting lineup for a World Cup match since Bulgaria versus England in 1962. So in that match, Alba assisted on Asensio's 2-0. Alba then won a PK, and Ferran finished it for the 3-0. Torres then got the 4-0. Really bad Costa Rica defending, by the way, but good composure by Torres. Torres and Pedri exited in the 57th. Alba swapped out for Balde, who comes in the 64th, and Busquets left too. Gavi scored Spain's 5th with a wonderful outside of the boot volley, Spain's youngest ever goal scorer at the World Cup, obviously. Mm-hmm. Nico Williams has also been very impressive, I think, as a super sub, and maybe the reason why Ansu is not having any minutes, but we will talk about that on the second show this week, so put a pin in that on Ansu Fati. And it does look like Nico has those minutes on the right side as well, as instead of Ansu coming in on the left. And then putting that together with Spain's other result, and that's a 1-1 draw with Germany. Ferran Torres had another wild miss in that one. Busquets and Pedri played the whole game. Alba off for Balde again, just as the goal was scored. But I got to say that Spain were kind of losing some of the control when Koke came on for Gavi, and Gavi went to the bench. So Spain, this is the big topic. These are the big players we're talking about here, because that's the most Barcelona players available on any national team side. So, yeah, Emile, of all the names I said, Torres, Alba, Pedri, Gavi, where do you begin?
I mean, I think it's Pedri and Gavi. They are, I mean, I don't know. I guess we can probably just remix so much of what we said about these guys, week in and week out or month in and month out. But it is astounding just how not just good and talented they are. I mean, they're certainly that, but like how just confident and calm and assured, irrespective of, stage or circumstance or things like that. I mean, they are, kind of the I don't know, the platonic ideal, I suppose, of a midfield pairing that that I could think of, for players that age, because it boggles the mind that these guys are actually going to grow and mature and somehow get more savvy and more intelligent and better understand what's happening around them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the other questions being asked, I have nothing to add to Pedri and Gavi. I mean, Pedri, I was, when I made the predictions, hedging my bet, like, this could be another one where I think everybody already knows about Pedri, but Pedri's one of Spain's better players, like he is for FC Barcelona. And now he's 20, so people can stop saying the teenager thing because he just turned 20 last Thursday. So now he's just a 20-year-old, really, really, really good young player. And of course, I think that people kind of playing up, we'll get to Germany in a second here, but with Musiala and with Pedri and with Gavi, there was that picture of those three and everyone going crazy. And there are times, I think, when hype is right. Like Musiala, as a Kool-Aid, I take nothing away from him. He has been awesome, as well as, again, Pedri and Gavi. So in that game, Germany and Netherlands, and by the way, Memphis Depay and Frankie de Jong, again, this is live time stuff. Netherlands have taken a 2-0 lead over Qatar due to the efforts of Memphis Depay and Frankie de Jong there. So again, we'll get to de Jong in a second. But yeah, and then I think moving and shifting to Gavi, from Gavi and Pedri to Ferran Torres and Jordi Alba, Ferran Torres has been exactly, not say what we expected of him, but with the news coming out that Barcelona took Ferran Torres potentially over Dani Olmo. Dani Olmo has been good in this situation, and he probably even maybe would have been cheaper. He might have been 45 instead of 55 or 40 for RB Leipzig instead of the 55 paid to Man City for Ferran Torres. But when it comes to Ferran Torres, that miss against Germany, not getting the goal in that big moment, even though ironically enough, his last two big goals came against Real Madrid in El Clasico. And then for the Jordi Alba, Alejandro Balde situation, it's in complete inverse of Xavi's Barcelona, because Alba is a player with experience, the player that Luis Enrique wants. And the way that, and I think this is difficult because I think smarter people than me are really breaking down the Spain tactics. But this Spain under Luis Enrique is a bit more on the front foot even than FC Barcelona is. And so being on the front foot just gets you even more of the good stuff of Jordi Alba because you're not defending the way that Barcelona have to defend. And even though it is so many of the same faces, Jordi Alba, again, Luis Enrique does a better job of minimizing his issues and complementing what he does well, especially in the final third for Spain. And then when Alejandro Balde comes on, again, I don't really blame him for it was a bad touch, and he had some fault on that goal for Germany. But certainly, Germany had started to rev up the pressure. They had made their own subs, and it was just an inopportune time for Balde to check onto the field at that moment because I think Jordi Alba is capable of that same mistake and that same opportunity. So yeah, for Ferran Torres, it's hot and cold as expected, but now the rest of the world gets to do the Ferran Torres experience that Kool-Aids have been doing all year. And for Jordi Alba, I think the question of, is he revitalized? I mean, I don't know. I think that Luis Enrique's Spain is again, continuing to bring the best out of him. I'm not saying he's not a great player. It's just that, he's for Barcelona as opposed to Spain. He just gets called up. For Barca, what he makes is not equal to the production in the way that being called up by Spain is equal to that production. And it's a financial thing about Barcelona.
Yeah. So, yes. So kind of unpacking what you were saying, I do agree that I think, Luis Enrique's approach is, I think you said more front-footed, which I think there's a lot to, and it's just more direct, I think. And particularly, I think, like, as you said, at this stage, this vintage of Jordi Alba, I think, is best suited to that because I don't know that he's particularly well suited to defending. So, in that sense, I think he's really well cut out for it. There's an interesting observation that I've made, completely anecdotal, of course, but just in watching Ferran Torres against, as a part of the Spain team, and even just as a part of this year's Barca team, but I feel like even though the stuff that we complain about or, sort of you get a little annoyed with in his game with Barca, I mean, by and large, it's still present, when he's with the Spanish team. But I do feel like he it seems at least like he's shouldering less weight when he's with the Spanish team. Now, maybe it's just a relationship with Luis Enrique. Maybe it's, just the combination of teammates that he has or whatever it is. And I do feel like even this season, the angst and sort of the genuine sort of almost feeling like he was, about to explode when something goes wrong isn't as pronounced with Barca. And I think that might be a little bit too, because the team is just simply better. But, it's nice to see him scoring goals. And I would like to see him net, 1 or 2 more, because I do think irrespective of how you get them, if he can come back from a World Cup, especially if Spain make a run to, semifinals, the finals, who knows, win the thing. And you come back with 3 or 4 World Cup goals and either a gold or silver medal, to your name. I feel like it does kind of, both in the eyes of the world, but also internally, has to really catapult your sense of what you can achieve as a player. And it has to be a monumental confidence boost, which I feel like with Ferran has been probably the biggest problem he's had, I think, has been confidence. There's also, I guess, clinical execution, but it also seems like the crises of confidence have occasionally hit him as well.
Yeah, then moving on to Germany, where there's none of the report on the Barcelona side. I already gave the compliment to Musiala, and their comeback loss to Japan, that 2-1,
yep.
One of the games of the tournament, along with the 1-1 with Spain. So Germany, part of, I kind of said this, right? You have the only matchup with 2 former World Cup champions in this group stage, that being Germany and Spain. So that was kind of going to be the group to watch, right? That felt like the group of death, because Germany's results in the Nations League and all that stuff have not been great. So they were just they dropped down a little bit. And so you were able to get that matchup. Now, again, Barcelona player-wise, Ter Stegen just on the bench, and he was never going to play ahead of Neuer. We talked about that aplenty. And Neuer has been, Neuer good when he's needed to be. And then when Germany fall apart against Japan, there's nothing Neuer can do about those. So shifting gears to France, with a bit of optimism. 4-1 against Australia. Dembele played 77 minutes, assisted on the 3-1 that Mbappe scored. One of the rare goals in the tournaments, by the way. There was an accurate cross. This one being a header from Mbappe. We have not really seen many of those. Yep. And then Koundé came on in the 89th minute. And then the 2-1 win over Denmark. It was a brace from Mbappe, 75 more minutes from Dembele. And interesting note here, for France, 8 of France's last 14 goals conceded at the World Cup have come from set pieces, so more than half have come from set pieces. Now, little fault is given to that of Dembele, because we're really focusing on Dembele and Koundé here. Koundé playing right back, by the way, against Denmark for France. And Koundé, he's been good at right back, and it's one of those questions, I think, that we'll see how the rest of this tournament plays out, because France is already booked their ticket to the next round. So I think that conversation with Koundé at right back is kind of ever evolving. But at the moment, I think the focus should be on Dembele here, because Dembele has been consistent, he's been healthy, and he has just kind of gone out and worked well with Mbappe, and he's done well. And really, it's one of those things where Dembele has been the player at the level that we expect him to be. Let's put it that way, right? It's like there's A-tier players, and that's Mbappe. As much as you can say about PSG, Mbappe's an A-tier player.
Yeah.
Dembele is proving himself. And for Barcelona, we've seen it this year. And I think now with the World Cup for France, as a B-tier player, and he's shown up and he's playing like a B-tier player, and there's no drama, there's no nothing. It's just, here's what we expect from Dembele, and here's what we're getting out of Dembele. And
he's just been excellent.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing, right? That Dembele's issue is inconsistency. And if at a whole World Cup he's consistent, I leave nothing. There's still plenty of time to go, but I leave the World Cup saying nothing but, okay, those are all positive things from Ousmane Dembele at this World Cup so far.
Oh, exactly. I think, I think the question of consistency is strange. As you bring it up, it's absolutely, that's his, if he can iron out any, lingering inconsistency issues that he has, he's, whatever, he is an A-tier player. If he's doing that every single game, then he is, if not Mbappe good, he's, one of the very best players in the world. What's interesting with, we talk about consistency in a World Cup, and it's an odd sort of situation, because I don't know how like if a month and sort of 6 games is enough to build consistency, or is that did you get hot? You know what I mean? Like, is that, did you find the right streak? And because especially when you're out in the middle of, literally out in the middle of nowhere. And so there's nothing familiar, nothing, so you might as well be playing in like outer space, particularly with this tournament. And so I do think it's very much, I don't know how much of, obviously there's domestic form that you can bring in, but I don't know how much of the club football experience and the whatever you would consider normal life translates to, whatever this is that's going on in Qatar for 5 or 6 weeks. So, but irrespective, it's great to see him, whether we call it consistency or raising his game or, just whatever, vibing with Mbappe or whatever it is. He's looked excellent. Particularly I thought, even particularly before France scored against Denmark, I thought he, even for a good portion of the first half, I thought he was better than Mbappe in that in that stretch. And, he didn't really fall off much. He started to taper a bit in the second half and then they took him out, but he was phenomenal all game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. That's one of those things where, he doesn't get the headlines because it's a World Cup, and I'm going to likely have a YouTube video out later this week about stock risers and things like that. And I think a lot of it comes down to who scores goals. Like, that's the thing about the World Cup, right? Yeah. Like, if you're the player that comes up in the big moment, because that's the whole thing about the World Cup, that it's the most pressurized situation that the football world does have for you, right? It's, we're listening to the things. You and I are both, foreign Americans, but between America and Iran, there's so much going on. Yep. Off the field. Even the protests, the fact that it's in Qatar, like all of these factors that are at play here at this World Cup that are reminding you that it isn't just club football, right? And for the club football, the things in the background of the Super League, right? Or ownership of those clubs, right? Yeah. The dark arts of those things. But if you watch about FIFA or been paying attention in any way in the last year, like the level of corruption, very much like the pressure, very much of what it means to be a hero at the World Cup, like all of that is the dial is up. Speaking of being a hero for their country, it is Andreas Christensen, 0-0 with Tunisia. He played 90 minutes. That Denmark back four was really good. Mm-hmm. And Tunisia, they didn't really do enough. That was a pretty rough game, I have to be honest, 0-0 with Tunisia and Denmark. But again, Christensen's job is to defend and not allow goals in, and Tunisia didn't sniff it. Mm-hmm. And then the 2-1 loss to France. Christensen header goal coming from a corner. Yeah. And it was a rough miss, by the way, by our old friend Martin Brathwaite, who I guess is still a little bit of a villain, does play for Espanyol. So coming up at the end of next month when play resumes, he's going to be a villain on the other side of that the Catalan derby. But yeah, Christensen's header goal, a big moment for Denmark. They tied it up at the 1-1 at that point. And France had to find something through Mbappe. They had to fight for it and get their goal. But Christensen, I think he's been good throughout this tournament, sturdy, steady, and it's very much like Dembele. It's like, Christensen, what he does for Barca, because he's kind of been injured so far, and now he's been healthy, but what he gives you is what you want him to be, and so far at this World Cup, he's been what Culés want him to be. So just bring that back to Barcelona, just like Dembele, and Barcelona have a good play on their hands.
Yeah, Christensen, it was never... When he was acquired, neither the free price tag nor any kind of reputational stuff, had us under the impression that, you're not expecting a spectacular kind of world-beating, game-changing player. If you get a good, solid, shows up every day, functional defender, that's fantastic. And I actually thought his goal was really good too, because he reacted. I think there was like a little bit of a deflection. It didn't look like, it was by no means certain that it was going to get to him. And, just the way he pounced was really good. And I think particularly, this relates more to Denmark, but, just watching them play, it doesn't look like they have a goal scorer, like a guy, there's, Christian Eriksen can score goals or anything like that, but like they don't have a striker, which is very strange. So the funny thing is that kind of stuff that, when it gets messy in the box and you're able to pounce on something and put it in the goal, especially for Denmark, I think, what he did was of paramount importance. And if they're going to get out of the group and, do anything of note, I mean, if not him, but it's going to have to be players like him, because I really like their attack is about as blunt as just about any I've seen from, sort of a team that you would have any expectations of.
So switching gears now to Argentina, as people can tell if you're watching the video, podcast-wise, the magic is always done, so you don't notice. But you might have heard a puppy in the background for that first part, and it's time for her to take another nap. And then Emile's also now fashioning headphones so we can hear each other a little bit better. So yeah, that's what happened when you come back from a little holiday or a little break. Not everything perfect, and the puppy certainly. She went with us, by the way, halfway across the country to visit some family, and it was a good adventure for her. But now that she's back home and by herself again without other dogs to play with, boy, is she being not very behaved. In a way that this is a weird transition, but for Argentina, we'll say this: Saudi Arabia did not behave the way that Argentina expected them to in their opener, causing the upset 2-1 victory. Messi with a PK in the 10th, then 2 Saudi Arabia goals early in the first half. In the second half, rather, and then Christian Romero for Tottenham with some answering to do, certainly, in that game. Argentina just kind of breaking down, wilting. And then they went out and they took care of business, well, as much business as they could in the next one. 2-0 win over Mexico. Took a while, wasn't necessarily pretty, but Messi finally got through in the 64th. And then Enzo Fernandez, one of those players I did tell you to watch for Benfica as a defensive midfielder, he gets it from Messi and then puts it in 2-0. And Argentina did not hit the target in the entire first half, by the way, of that game against Mexico. And for somebody who watched a lot of CONCACAF and who watches a lot of Mexico, they have kind of been unwatchable. That's a little aside here, but yeah, they certainly have been a disappointment, and putting a lot of it on the U.S. to be the hope of CONCACAF region, because Canada also were probably in arguably the toughest group, like with all the 4 teams kind of closest to each other, and they have already been spit out of this competition. But talking about Argentina, interesting too to note for them that in the midst of all this, as is expected with Messi, it happens every single World Cup, whether it's usually in the summer, of course. As, by the way, Netherlands scored their 3rd, so they're up 3-0 on Qatar, and they have pretty much done and dusted, won the group. But anyway, news comes out that Messi to Inter Miami this summer, when his contract is up, is to happen, and then Busquets and Luis Suarez could join him. Messi camp has already shut that one down, but it's interesting it's coming from the Messi camp, because you would have to admit that it's so weird with the Busquets news, we didn't really talk about him with Spain, but going back to the Busquets news, that he would potentially go to Inter Miami or take that step to the U.S. and not play, very much like Iniesta or even like a Xavi when he left and went to Qatar as a player, that they're not going to try some other European glory or some other European thing. They're just going to say, hey, I'm no longer at the top of my game at FC Barcelona, so it's time for, we'll say, the next step down, if you will, in terms of competition and expectations for me as a player. But the whole thing about Messi potentially joining him, I don't know about that, because I think now we're talking Inter Miami, we're talking PSG, we're talking Barcelona, and Messi clearly in this tournament is showing you he has a lot left to give at the top level, though.
It turns out Netherlands' goal has been disallowed by VAR, but the result is not in question. But in speaking of Busquets, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head. For Busquets, I think his play has deteriorated. I mean, you and I have tried to diagnose this in various ways. I mean, he's not that he's ever been, a hyper athlete, but, whether in terms of athleticism, positioning, and whatever it is, his performances have declined at Barcelona to a point where the, workload that he's getting at Barca needs to be called into question. So I don't know that if he were leaving Barcelona, the only club he's ever been at, where he's, literally played the role that was named after him. He's had one job and he has defined that role, kind of like few players have in his generation. I don't know how, when you're in decline, do you leave, you're able to leave that kind of role, go to another top European league and assume that you're going to transition into, I mean, by definition, it's going to be literally any role is going to be different. So yeah, from Busquets' perspective, it completely makes sense. I mean, I don't know that he has, in new surroundings, new teammates, everything, I don't know that he necessarily is geared to contribute to a significant winner. Now, I mean, yeah, you go to Miami and yeah, I guess you collect another, it's your 8-figure retirement plan, your, golden handshake, and you go hang out on South Beach or, wherever, Jupiter Island or wherever you want. And yeah, it's pretty good. It's good work if you can get it. The thing is with Messi, I think you also said that Messi is still like really, really, really good. I mean, his greatest crime is not being, his greatest sin has been not being, peak Messi, which is, essentially a brain melting life form. So, I mean, the fact that he's just merely looked like, a mega superstar, and that's, been held against him, it kind of tells you all you need to know.
I mean, he's been incredible at PSG this year, and he has been incredible for Argentina this year.
Yep.
And I think for Messi, in this tournament, I'm going to kick the can down the road to talk about Messi, because for Argentina, with that upset at Saudi Arabia, by the way, I mean, one of the biggest upsets in World Cup history. And I think Messi, in terms of the optics of it, you could tell that if it wasn't coming from Messi, it kind of wasn't going to come. And that was the issue with Argentina coming in that shouldn't have been. Like I had said, that this is the most balanced and Argentina is built totally around Messi. So I think he did a good job, that being Messi and his PR team, whoever was required to do this job, to kind of sidestep, not say any blame, but say, hey, Spain lost in 2010 in their opener. Others have done it before and then went on to win the World Cup. So it is kind of like we get punched in the mouth. Now you recuperate and you figure it out, and they can still win their group, by the way.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the one thing, look, I understand it's offside, so it doesn't, it doesn't count. Like you can say, hey, you put it in the net, but, it doesn't count because it was offside. But I think particularly there was the one of the two Lautaro offside goals where it was, sort of from the elbow down or from the bicep down, he was offside. And I know by the letter it was offside, but that's one of those offside calls that flies in the face of the actual spirit of the rule. Because
that was a big.
You either have rules there because you want to unnecessarily restrict things, which is what offside feels like an overwhelming majority of the time. Like it's supposed to be there to prevent guys from, genuinely getting an unfair advantage. Like the fact that a dude's like elbow is offside is it's not the reason why that's there. We're just, this is how you pay bureaucrats. But like, so I do think it was very much, if that's called in a particular way that keeps with the spirit of the game, I think Argentina are up 2-0, and I don't think Saudi Arabia backs down. I mean, maybe they even do get 2 goals and, or whatever. But I mean, that is the paper thinnest of margins that could have absolutely changed the complexion of that game. Never mind the, Messi was half a step offside, if he positions better. I mean, they had the ball in the net 4 times in the first half.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened. I mean, they really, all the wind went out of their sails, seemingly at halftime or somewhere around the, maybe 35, 40-minute mark.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of, say winning your group, because again, Argentina can still do that, even though they were shocked by Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
And speaking of winning the group, as I said, France is already in the next round. At the moment, as we speak, Netherlands, they're going to win their group. And Brazil have pretty much already won their group as well. They got a 2-0 win over Serbia to start. That was a really good game. I think Serbia, say 2-0 is kind of almost unfair to Serbia because of how much they were up to that game. Richarlison, of course, obviously gets the headlines here with the brace and the overhead kick.
Yep.
Rafinha, though, did play 87 minutes. And it was interesting to me that, and this kind of being the theme here, that we talk about the number 10 being dead, but the former Barcelona player in Neymar is kind of, not say reshifting that narrative, but also former Barcelona player in Griezmann kind of reshifting that narrative. Because with Brazil, it's in a perfect world, as in the first game, it's Richarlison, Vini Jr., Neymar, who, again, is out through at least to the rest of the group stage. Not that Brazil need him. They've already qualified. And then Rafinha on the right. And then with France, you have, because Benzema went down, you have Giroud, Griezmann, Mbappe, and Dembele, not foursome. So, it's interesting to me that I think through the group stage, both of our favorites, that being Brazil and France, probably respectively. They're such heavy favorites playing in a 4-2-3-1. It's just positionally very interesting to me. And then the 1-0 against Switzerland, I mean, Brazil obviously knew that if you get a result here, you win the group. That's it. Switzerland has been the second best in that, even though they had a draw to start things. But Casemiro gets to go on the long shot. Rafinha should have had an assist, by the way, in this game. It would have been a great assist too, but Vini Jr. missed it. And, it's interesting in that then Switzerland game, how Brazil couldn't really create through the middle as well without Neymar. It's very much like for like, but defensively, they also lost nothing by putting Rodrigo up top with Richarlison. Defensively, Brazil have also been really, really good. They haven't had to use 39-year-old Dani Alves or anything, but Alexandro has been good. Thiago Silva has been good. Marquinhos has been as steady as we expect him to be. So Brazil are proving themselves to be favorites, but it's interesting to me that if Brazil are to win this tournament, I think at some point Rafinha is going to have his moment. And I think for his confidence, especially the way he entered into the World Cup, again, that really big, important game, down to 10 men, he gets that goal with the head that he needs to get and kind of changes the narrative, if you will, heading into the break. And if he's playing with confidence, coming off a World Cup with Brazil, and again, has his moment, and Brazil somehow either finishes first, second, or third, or whatever it may be, gets to the semifinal, that's, again, just like Christensen, just like Dembele, a good thing for Barcelona.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, we've talked about Rafinha, and I mean, particularly as I've watched the two Brazil games, I've thought about the Rafinha experience in Barcelona, and he has intermittently looked really good, but I mean, I do think he, of late, like, he's tapered off a bit, and it would be wonderful to see him play himself into what is clearly his world-class potential, but basically not on Barca's time. Like, it would be amazing if he could do that, and then essentially just come back feeling, I mean, ideally, if Brazil win the World Cup, I do feel like Rafinha is the kind of player that could really sort of benefit from that, because I feel like so much of what he does, and I mean, I feel like that position in general, confidence and self-assuredness and that element of it, I think is a huge, huge part of it, because a lot of it, on the wing, there are these sorts of one-on-one duels that you need to win. You need to get past a guy, and then, tactics and everything and technique coming after that. But I mean, I feel like he just having a good World Cup, and ideally, though, if Brazil can win the thing, he would be really well positioned to use this tournament as a big springboard, almost in a way similar to how we talked about Dembele. But I think Dembele is coming in to this tournament in better form.
Yeah. And now shifting to the Netherlands, speaking of better form, again, Frankie de Jong just had a goal here. It's like the 80th minute for Netherlands, up 2-0 over Qatar. And Senegal, Ecuador, though that has probably been the game to watch. No Barcelona players there, but Ecuador tied it up in the 67th, and then 3 minutes later in the 70th, Senegal come to answer through Koulibaly, the old Barcelona target, and now the Chelsea center back. So, yeah, I mean, that went back and forth, and that's what happens, though, through 3 group stage games. Like Ecuador, they'd become kind of a darling. I mean, I thought their game against Netherlands was great, and I'm like looking at Ecuador players, and all of a sudden they're going to be out of the group stage. Now the narrative switches. That's how it goes. But the narrative for Netherlands was that, this group was one they should win, and a bit of pressure, just like Belgium, was kind of on them, with Senegal and Ecuador kind of looming. But it seems like Netherlands taking care of business. And one of the big reasons, their best player, this isn't just coming from a Kool-Aid. We go back to the same thing with Denmark and Christensen. Frankie de Jong and Netherlands, it's not been great. They have not looked amazing, I think, at any point in this tournament. But Frankie has been their best player by far. 2-0 Senegal win, 90 minutes for Frankie, 28 for Memphis. And then 1-1 against Ecuador, 90 more minutes for Frankie. And, that one was the 1-1 with Ecuador. More credit deserved to Ecuador, as I said, than taking anything away from the Dutch there. Yeah. Frankie had more tackles with 9 than any other player at the World Cup. 2 total shot attempts by the Netherlands, though, was the problem, and only 6 touches in the Ecuador box. So other than some of that does go on Memphis, by the way, in that game against Ecuador, because he did play there. He came on in the second half, but never really made an impact other than the flick in the 73rd for Gakpo, and Gakpo shot it wide, but it was also offside, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway, even though it was pretty good confidence from Memphis. And again, as we speak, Netherlands threw Frankie de Jong up 2-0 over Qatar. So again, I think it's a little bit of roast and thorns here for Frankie and Memphis. As far as what Barcelona's January transfer business is, we're going to do that on Friday, so I'm not really hashing it out now. But Memphis getting a way out or finding an exit is a big part of that. And I think, as we've seen throughout time, I mean, you and I know with the NBA, I think of Kawhi Leonard, but that situation was 100 times worse or 1,000 times worse than what we're talking about with Barca and Memphis. But certainly, yeah, Memphis being hurt for all this time and then showing up and coming on in the opener to play 28 minutes, it's puzzling. It's a question mark. But I understand why, just like Araujo, who has not been named to any Uruguay team sheet so far, but is still kind of available and trying to work his way back for this World Cup in Uruguay camp. You know, players do want to play in the World Cup. Not that they don't want to play for their club, but, you know, they do want to play in the World Cup, and they're going to fight through injury a bit harder to do that. And of course, a club isn't going to like that because it could put them at risk. But Memphis, as far as even trying to, I don't know if he needs to showcase himself, but yeah, showcasing himself on the biggest stage, if he has some kind of moment here in the knockout rounds, then maybe he can secure a move a little more easily.
I definitely agree with that, because I think with Memphis, the two things that you want to see is, I mean, by far the first thing that you want to see is that he's healthy, that he's just able to move around well and everything like that. And I think with him, and I realize this is something of a legacy concern at this point, because even with all the sort of the shuffling and the upheaval and things like that have happened at Barca, you know, in terms of attitude and just presence in the locker room, he's been, you know, by all accounts, from what you hear and what you read and you see his interactions with people, apparently, you know, I'm guessing he's been fine, like, because nothing in the press has come out that he's, you know, been. So that's kind of the thing: is his head right and is his body right? I mean, it seems as though his head is right, and yeah, if you can see him put together not even a couple of 90s, but just a couple of decent 70s, and where either he scores or he looks like himself, I could very much see the pathway out for him. I mean, I don't know what the price tag would be, or I don't know what I mean, I guess if anything, it would just be another kind of clear the decks, lighten the payroll load type transaction.
Maybe 7 to 10 mil, but again, his contract is up anyway, so it's not like it's or next season. So it's not like like you're trying to reinvent the wheel here with that kind of transfer. You're just kind of giving this player a way out. Even if it's a paid loan, like what if he goes for the rest of the season for 6 months on a €2 million loan? You could see that too.
Oh,
but
exactly.
And what to say of De Jong? That De Jong goes into this break in really good form. And again, he's just really important and really, really good for the Netherlands. And it's a bit of a broken record, but I don't have many negative things to say about any inconsistency with the Barca players. Like, their teams are doing well, and those players are an important part of those teams.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we can even extend it to like it's, what did we say before, like kind of Barca plus Messi sort of thing. But I don't know that you can pin any of the, you know, suboptimal results, I guess we'll say, because they're not all necessarily defeats, but I don't know that you can pin any of them on a Barca player, or are there any, you know, necessarily any glaring, you know, mistakes that are made. I mean, I guess you can say in Spain, Germany, you know, maybe here or there, but by and large, I mean, I don't think a Barca player has really meaningfully put a foot wrong, or, you know, kind of left the door wide open and invited disaster, which, you know, beyond returning everyone home healthy and ideally some of them with winners medals, that's, I guess, you know, the best you can hope for. I mean, you hope, if first and foremost, you obviously hope no one's body or any part of their body or ligament or tendon goes in the tank. But secondly, like, you know, you just want them to return sort of psychologically whole as well. You know, you don't want them sort of carrying some sort of like national tragedy on their conscience, you know, when they come home.
Well, reminder, all the teams or any of the teams that might get to the final or the semifinal, what have you, they're going to get about a week and a half until they're right back in playing in club football, right? Like, again, problematically, having this Winter World Cup is not going to be great, no matter what no matter how well players do, or no matter even if they can avoid injury, it's still like the load is still, as Thomas Muller always says, like just too much for players. And speaking of, again, Araujo.
I hate to. Oh, sorry. I hate to so nakedly root against a couple of the Barca players, but the good thing is, I mean, presumably, I don't think Uruguay will get through. So hopefully, we can get Araujo just back on a couch for a while, and and things are not looking ideal for Poland either. So let's.
Well, who knows about that? Because I mean, that's what we're doing next. The last two we have here, Uruguay 2-0 with South Korea. Not great from Luis Suarez, former Barcelona player, you'll know, third all-time goal scorer, and Araujo not named to the matchday squad. Same thing, Araujo not named to the matchday squad for the 2-0 loss to Portugal either. And now Uruguay, as you mentioned, need a result against Ghana, and hoping that South Korea don't get a result against Portugal, which Portugal, they've already won the group. They're the other third team that has advanced after two match days. Again, Netherlands taking care of business now, booking their ticket by the time this is done, and we've already recorded this. So, yeah, I mean, Uruguay, it might be time for Araujo to get some rest, and no issues there for me. I'll talk a little bit more about Uruguay in probably, again, one of those, maybe I'll have a video later in the week about that. And then the last is Poland. And interesting to note that Argentina still likely need a result of some kind against Poland to go through past Saudi Arabia. And I did, again, pick Mexico to finish second in that group. That was wrong. And Poland, that 0-0 with Mexico, really ugly match. Again, arguably the worst one of the tournament. It's definitely there in like the top 4 or 5 worst that we've seen so far. Poland barely touched the ball, 6 total shots on target. But again, Mexico weren't good either. And then Poland go out, take care of business against Saudi Arabia, 2-0 win there. Scored, that being Lewandowski, scored Poland's second and his first at the World Cup. And he took it away from the Saudi Arabian player, finished it without too much resistance because of the awful, awful mistake. So it's not like it was an amazing goal, but for him, as he said later, it was an important goal for him to, and you are, again, when you talk about that A tier of player, and arguably maybe the B tier, but the A tier of player, which Lewandowski is in, obviously a guy fighting for the Ballon d'Or every year, they need those moments for their legacy. And I think as much as they talk about the team thing, and Poland very much is team-wise Lewandowski, and his success is their success, but there are certain markers in a player's career that you say, hey, I did that, right? When you hang up your boots and say, okay, at least, even if you don't brag about it, I was able to accomplish this thing I want to accomplish, and getting a goal at the World Cup was on Lewandowski's list. You could tell the relief that he felt, especially having missed that earlier penalty as well. And his penalty kicking, kind of concerning, that being Lewandowski's, but I don't really take that away from anything. But yeah, so for Poland, I mean, who knows? They could shock Argentina, and then Argentina are out and Poland is through. And then, I mean, I think for Kool-Aid's, this is a fun thing that we end this with. For Kool-Aid's, it's funny because so many are going to be rooting for Argentina and Messi. Because Messi, is Barcelona. But Lewandowski is Barcelona's player right now, right? So it's like, it does feel odd because it's like, oh, can I pick one, right? It's like, it's Christmas is coming up, so it's going to get, kind of interesting in different households, but is it dad or stepdad or, right? Like,
so I'm, I guess I already walked you through a little bit of my internal emotional negotiations, which is, on reflex, on instinct, I root for Argentina and Messi in all of these tournaments. And I am able to reconcile with myself rooting against Barca's current, number one goal threat by both ensuring, by saying that I'm rooting for ensuring his health and rest. And also, this is less kind, but if Poland get through, I mean, I don't really see a pathway to anything meaningful for them, So I mean, I feel like the ceiling for Argentina is just more meaningful here than it is for Poland, and
I don't think it's crazy. I'm the same boat. I think so many Kool-Aids are. I think it takes a really, a special fan or to be able to kind of unlock their brain and say, when a player plays for my club, I root for them, and then when they're gone, like I've disconnected. And I think you can do that with certain players, right? Like if Memphis leaves, like to Manchester United, he was fine at Barcelona. I rooted for him for Barcelona, but when he's not in a Barca shirt, like that, I'm so sorry, but that's it. But for Messi was Barcelona in the same way for so long. So it's like, and I've just known I've had to root against Lewandowski for so many years now, right? Because he would ruin. Like it's so many times I go, Lewandowski, can you please not make half my listeners stop listening because Barcelona are the Champions League.
Yep.
Could you please relax here? And he doesn't. And he just kept doing it for Bayern Munich for so many years. So, I mean, I had to root against him for so long. And now, it's 2.5 months of rooting for him, but rooting for him through Barcelona's success, through Xavi, through Pedri, through Gavi, through, Balde, through the hope that is the future, that is players that other than, yes, Pedri played for Las Palmas. I know that, but he's obviously already a Barcelona player, right? And that's where his great success has come. So for Messi, his great success will always have been at Barcelona, and we're always going to want him to do well, because after years and years and years of defending him against the PR machine of Cristiano Ronaldo, and, I didn't talk about Portugal here, but that whole thing yesterday where Bruno Fernandes scores and Cristiano Ronaldo, instead of congratulating him, is yelling at the refs. That was my goal. I got my head on it. I got a tip on it. And the whole thing.
I given all I've sort of pieced together of the man over the years, I have to say I applaud Cristiano's restraint in trying to claim that goal yesterday. Like, I'm surprised that he kept his shirt on and didn't do the little, like, see you hop.
Right. Yeah, I feel like for that goal yesterday, I think even when he jumped, he didn't really fully complete the spin. His teammates were already on him a little bit too quickly. But yeah, we didn't really do Portugal. They've already booked their ticket too, so I'll probably have to talk about Portugal later on in this tournament. The other note here, I guess we'll cover that on Friday a little bit in more detail, but Ruben Neves, who has been, because of Jorge Mendes, constantly linked to Barcelona. Yeah. I don't think there's anything, not to say that the old wise man's transfer tale is, do not look at the World Cup to buy a player, and do not look at the World Cup to not buy a player, right? I think it works both ways. Yeah. And Ruben Neves, I would have to take that advice on the latter there, because he has not had a World Cup where if I'm Barcelona, I'm saying, okay, that's our replacement for Busquets. Like, nothing in this tournament has indicated that from Ruben Neves, obviously. And then the other notes here, USA drew both England and Wales, so they're now fighting for their lives in a few hours. Again, by the time you hear this, whether or not I'm having a pretty sad, solemn night, because the US has been good enough to move on. And if they don't, and then England obviously are still floating around there. But as good as they were against Iran, against the USA, they kind of went down to the USA's level, and then the US went up a little bit to England's level. And I think that's kind of what you saw there. And then, as I've said, France were good, Brazil were good, some of these favorites are good. And then the last final note here is that Morocco, with a win over Belgium, who only snuck by a not-so-great Canada 1-0, are looking like one of the winners of the tournament. Abde has just 25 total minutes in a 0-0 draw with Croatia, but that draw with Croatia, and then again the win over Belgium, Morocco have probably been the best, not what we expected from them team. I even had them.
Yeah, they're definitely the surprise of the group stage, I think.
Yeah, I even picked them.
I guess Saudi Arabia as well, but yeah.
Right. But I mean, Saudi Arabia might not even move on. Morocco are, very, very, very likely are they moving on, because again, now Morocco, only have to get by Canada now, a Canada team that's already out. So Croatia have been really good, but Belgium have been a disappointment in the same way, right? Whenever you have one surprise, there's disappointment. And Morocco in particular, I have to go. They're one of those teams where, you can't watch every game. You can't focus on every game. You can't think about every game. So Morocco, I've had a half an eye on this whole tournament. I think I've only seen part of 1.5 games. So they're one of those teams I want to go back and look and think about, because their defensive setup has been really interesting to me, where they have just an abundance of, very much like Xavi's doing with Alonso and Alba and Balde. They just have an abundance of very similar players, but defensively they've been really, really solid, and arguably the best defense that we have seen at the World Cup so far, just organized and right on every margin.
Yeah, I admittedly haven't. Yeah, of the teams that I've not been able to see much of, it has been Morocco, and I'm trying to think who else is it. I was just looking recently, and there was a team that, for me, it feels like their World Cup has not yet started, because I've personally not laid eyes on one of their games. So I think it was Morocco. Oh, and I've actually not seen Australia either. I've watched highlights of their games, but at this point, no. But just what I've been reading about Morocco, and just even looking at stats, and I've watched like extended highlights of each game, and what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I don't have a large enough sample size that I've seen to make any kind of educated statement about it, but the limited bits that I've seen do line up with essentially what you're describing. And it's fascinating now. So they are, it's so it's them and is it them in Canada? Yeah, it's them in Canada now, right?
Canada team that has just not been up to it. Again, not doing CONCACAF proud, just like Costa Rica against Spain. So yeah, CONCACAF definitely the federation that's taking the biggest L in this World Cup, for sure. Okay, so the last
Canada looked so good in that first game against Belgium, and then you come out and get on the board 2 minutes in your second game, and you figure, all right, they worked out the kinks, and then buddy, it was not great after that.
Croatia doing Croatian things. Okay, and final thing here before we wrap up. In the last week, the Femini had a huge game at the Camp Nou last Thursday, and that was against Bayern Munich. It was a 3-0 win. And again, if you didn't even watch the highlights, do watch the highlights because Claudia Pina, as far as transfer stuff on the women's side of stuff, she has been such a difference maker this year, and Barcelona are proving that they were wise to keep her and let Jenny Hermoso go. And I know that saying full well that Jenny may have already made her choice. We read her Instagram posts and what I've heard too, that she'd already made her choice on her own that she wasn't going to come back, that she wanted to do the next phase of her career. And, but even if she had to want to come back, kind of like the Xavi Busquets situation, apparently Xavi's the one pushing for that contract renewal. If it was the club saying, hey, Jenny, we still want you around, if it had been this year, then likely they had the money where she would have been around. But in the case of Claudia Pina, there was this, moment where she went on loan to Sevilla. Was she going to get a time and minutes when she came back with Swala and all those other attacking options? And Pina has been as good as advertised. Like, we started to know about her at 16. And honestly, she was one of those first players where I was like, oh, there are, because when it comes to youth football on the women's side of things, because of the amount of money, especially in the U.S., how the U.S. is one of the best teams, because of the amount of money in the women's game, so many of them might even choose to do other things or teeter out. So looking at a U16 team or U18 team, some of those players, no matter what, around the world, like they might choose. I mean, we're talking even Spain youth players or France youth players. They might choose to come to the U.S. to play college soccer, get a scholarship, and just, kind of leave and go about it that way, even though they were selected to a youth team at national team level. And they might choose to do that. So when it comes to the variance of, young prodigies, if you will, of the women's game, there's even more variance where it's not, you can't really trust a player until she is 18 or 20 or 21 and has completely committed to being a full professional. Pina was kind of the exception to that rule, if you will, where I remember seeing her when she was 16 and I was like, oh, I think that's a women's prodigy. I think that's what that is. And she has so far proven to be as such, again, still in her early 20s and still getting better. She just
turned 20.
Yeah, and she's just getting better. And so I just want to end the show kind of by singing the praises of Claudia Pina.
So before we started recording, I was actually writing about that night, that game, and basically going through stuff I've previously written about Claudia Pina and trying to, I think I've called her, let's see, I have referred to her. So yeah, when she was at the 12-13 level, she appeared in 20 games. When she was 11 at the age 12-13 level, she appeared in 20 games and scored 100 goals. And then she's the youngest ever player to play for a senior Barca team in an official match. And I guess I've referred to her as the most bloodthirsty in a team full of apex predators and the most innately ruthless attacker on Murderer's Row. And it somehow all still feel. So I was at the game on Thursday as well. So they only again, the funny thing is like the attendance was only about 47,000 this time, but they hadn't opened, but only half of the seats were open. Everything that was open was packed. So, but everyone was had pretty rockin' seats. So the funny thing is, I checked, she's listed at 5'5". If she is 5'5", I am a female gymnast. She is as tall as the corner flag. And like, I wish I had taken a picture. At one point she was standing, she is as tall as the 5 foot tall corner flag. And it's bonkers to me that she is so, I don't know, she's so strong, but like fast, and yet like, yeah, I mean, her center of gravity, her center of balance is unrivaled. I mean, it's that's almost Messi-esque, just in her, just how small she is, but how unbelievably difficult she is to supplant.
Yeah, I mean, there's no a Messi comparison is unfair to her, obviously, or to anybody.
Oh, of course, yeah,
especially across even the gender divide. But for Pina, it's a positioning that, to me, and when you say Messi-esque, where you go, where does she play? And against Bayern Munich, that was the difference. Where does she play? Is she the center forward? Is she? Yeah, maybe. Is she on the wing? Maybe. But is she this just attacking, magnanimous threat in the middle of the field that both attacks attention, but is also her own wrecking ball, whether with dribbling, with long shots, whatever she wants to do, combining her footwork. And I think that is a testament also to this Barcelona team that kind of gives you hope to say, like, oh, this generation, this great generation that won the Champions League final, they lost to Lyon, then they win the final, then they lose the final again to Lyon. You know, it was at this 3-year chapter where that's the story of that team. The end, because especially with Aitana kind of having her injuries this year, as well as, of course, Alexis Putellas is likely still out for the rest of the season. You know, when you have, you know, these again incredible players, and you feel like, oh, I know they were young, they're in their mid-20s still, and obviously Alexis Putellas pushing on 30 now, but you know, was that era going to be over with Jenny and Swallow and all that stuff? The answer clearly is no, because when you have Claudia Pina, you do need some of these players. You need like 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 of your players to be these killers. And Pina being a killer, like Alexia is, like Aitana is, like Patri is, you say, okay, this project, I mean, I think to say that winning the Champions League final was its ceiling, obviously winning a treble means you've hit your ceiling, but that ceiling is possible again, right? That you want to believe that Barcelona is still chasing down Lyon as opposed to the inverse, where Lyon is going to separate themselves again and Barcelona are going to fall back into the background in this mass amount of teams in Chelsea and Bayern Munich and the rest who are kind of exceeding and coming to that level.
Well, I think what's been absolutely incredible is, so Claudia Pina she in my mind is the nailed on sort of superstar next, you know, but then they also added Geise, who shared the Pichichi with Oshuala last year. So they had one of the top 2 goal scorers. So they just went and got the other one. You know, Lucy Bronze is, you know, just an absolute rock at left back. And she allows Rolfo to play on the right, where, I mean, that back line of Rolfo, Paredes, Leon, and Lucy Bronze is just hilariously stacked. And, you know, I mean, and that's not even, you don't even mention Patri, who I think you and I spoke about it. You used a really good, and I was actually going to include this in something I wrote for next week and credit you with it. You described Alexia as inevitable, and in a weird way, like Patri, while being less overtly spectacular, maybe, is every bit the kind of anchoring force and inevitable force. She's kind of slid seamlessly into the Alexia role, which would have been the most unenviable pair of shoes to have to slip on. And she's not trying to be Alexia, but she has kind of, you know, worn that, she's kind of accepted that mantle. And she absolutely is the steadying force and the kind of the midfield, the brain and the heart, you know what I mean? Along with Aitana, and I mean, there's just so many of them that are playing well. I mean, like Kira Walsh is astoundingly good, and just, you know, you can go this far with it, and then she comes up, and she's, you know, as good as anyone.
Well, I think I've almost done a disservice to Walsh, because when she initially was signed, again, because she comes from the UK, because she came for the number she did, which was breaking the transfer record, then it was like, oh, there's nothing she can do to assimilate. And then people watched the first 1 or 2 matches, and it didn't look like it clicked right away. But again, that was now months ago. And now that Walsh has perfectly fit in and assimilated just fine, right? Like we aren't revisiting that. So I'm glad we were able to. And I didn't do my due justice on getting the Femini this year, just because, again, the men's team are having the quote unquote resurgence that they are. Hopefully that continues on.
Fortunately, I've been to every home game thus far. And so I can always report back.
Yeah. So again, the Femini, their story, especially in the Champions League, unlike the men, is not yet written in any way this season. And it is one of those situations where, yes, with the Femini, it revs up as the season goes on, as they're fighting closer for those trophies. Because again, in their Spanish domestic campaign, Real Madrid are still not there as much as they would hope to be. They're not there. Atletico Madrid, they got a PK. It looked like they were there for 2 seconds, and then Lucy Bronze scores her first, and Barcelona just all over Atletico Madrid. Yep. So to say that is the derby of Spanish women's football, I think, is now shifted clearly to El Clasico from that Atletico Madrid Barcelona rivalry, which is what was the cornerstone of the Spanish women's division for the last decade, if you will.
Yep.
And now that has shifted and will shift continually with El Clasico, Barca against Real Madrid. All right, so that'll wrap it up. We have more World Cup talk coming up and some other fun stuff. Especially, we're actually talking a little bit about the finances too. I know, really exciting stuff on Friday. But I've got some stuff in the works as well, as I keep promising. But I mean it. I do have some stuff. So I know Twitter is exploding at the moment, but do give us a follow on Twitter. Just make sure you're there for the updates. On Instagram, I'll also try to make sure I remember to do that on Instagram. If not, also on YouTube, I do kind of put the updates there. And then, again, our Facebook group, you'll see it there as well, all across. Whatever the updates I have for you. So I just got some stuff in the works, as well as some content, as always. So that'll wrap it up. Follow him, Emile. Again, he's known better even for his writing. So make sure you read his stuff by following him down in the description below. And then we're on Twitter and Instagram, too, at the Barcelona Pod. Close Facebook group, Patreon, I already mentioned all that stuff, YouTube as well. So thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Forza Barca.
Forza Barca.